Hello everyone, JWT here. In today's video, let's learn how to implement authorization and authentication using Spring Security. Prepare yourself for the longest video in this playlist and please don't be frustrated because this security can be very frustrating because bugs are very hard to track and very easy to make. Okay, let's first see what we want to create. Okay, we want to create 4 new endpoints in our application. One of those 4 is register endpoint. So auth/register. You pass username, password, and you pass your list of roles, and endpoints just don't check things, it just register you. It cannot register you if you are already registered, but if you're not, it will just register you and that's it. Another endpoint is login. So /auth/login, you pass username and password, and the response of that endpoint is JWT token, which is some long string, as you will see. And now we have 2 new endpoints. One test endpoint for admin, which is /admin/test. This endpoint in our application won't do much. We will just create some system out print line inside this endpoint. But in order to be able to invoke this endpoint, you will need to have administrator privileges, which means that through authorization header, you need to pass JWT token of some user that has admin role, the token that you got from login endpoint. And then we will have another endpoint, which is the same as for administrator, just you're able to invoke this endpoint using the token of some user that has user privilege. You don't need admin privilege for this last endpoint. So let's try to explain how this JWT thing will work in our application and integrate it into the Spring Security. So you recognize this controller and service classes. Those are classes that we created before. But even before reaching controller, some code is executed in Spring. And concretely in Spring Security, there is some filter chain. This filter chain is nothing else but one class is doing something, and then when that job is done inside that class number 1, it calls next filter in the chain. Then next filter is doing something. When that filter is done, it calls next filter in the chain. And then after all filters are done, only then you are going to the controller. This is known as chain of responsibility pattern. Feel free to visit my blog and check out that pattern, but this is the most known Spring implementation of this chain of responsibility pattern. Now, Spring Security will add some default filters, as you will see, but we can add our filters as well, and we will do that. We will add our JWT filter. So this is our custom filter, and those two are filters that are coming from Spring Security. So what will our filter do? First of all, it will get the token from the authorization header. Then it will extract username from the token. Then, since we will save our registered users in our Postgres database, it will get username, password, and roles from the database, and then it will check if token is valid. Maybe token expired, or token or username in the token is not the same as the username in the database. If everything is okay, it will put one out object inside the Spring context, and then we are successfully authenticated. Okay, step number 1 is to add Spring Security dependencies to your project. So, just to remind you from the previous tutorials, you have this Spring Data JPA dependency in your build Gradle file, but now you want to add 4 new dependencies. Spring Boot Starter Security, That's a standard Spring security dependency. And since we are going to use JWT, we need few dependencies that will work with those JWTs. First of all, add those four dependencies. Okay, so since we are going to configure security for the whole project, in the root of the project, Java Mentor, I created package config, and inside config I created package security. So this is security config for the whole project. First of all, let's take a look at this class. What we are doing here. So this is one Spring configuration. We already talked about this. You recognize this bin annotation from the previous tutorials. So we are just configuring some Spring bins. We have those two annotations, those are known. Now this is the new annotation that we didn't saw previously, enable web security. This is necessary if you want to enable security using Spring Boot. Now this debug equals to true is not desired for the production environment, so in the real code you don't want this, but for debugging purpose it's great. We will just try to debug a little bit, so we will leave it as it is, and later on we will delete this debug equals to true. Now what we're doing, we are defining one bin which is called security filter chain. We want to configure out our application. First of all, we want to disable CSRF. I don't want to discuss what is this CSRF. It's one security concept. You can Google it online, but we want to disable that for our application for now. Second thing is we want to create application that is stateless, which means that it doesn't have session management. And we are doing it like this. So we want to go session management, creation policy, blah, 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 stateless. Take note that you all also have session policy never, which seems like session will never be created, but you can see here in the comments what is the difference. So if you set session policy to never, then Spring Security will not create sessions for you, but it will use one session if it already exists. On the contrary, stateless policy means that Spring will not create new sessions and it will not use session even if it exists. So it will ignore existing sessions. It will be totally stateless. We want that because JWT tokens are stateless. Now this provider is defined in our security config class, and we are just putting that provider that we configured in another class to be used by our HTTP security. So we will explain it later what is this all about. And now we are adding our filter, JWT authentication filter. So inside this filter that is also created by us, we will show it later. We want to add that filter, that is this JWT filter. That filter will do really extracting authorization header and so on and so on. I will explain later why it's very, very important to put that filter before this username password filter. And at the end, we just want to specify our endpoints. We want to say, okay, look, if our URL starts with auth and whatever it is after auth, then those endpoints are permit everyone to access those endpoints. Do the same for all get methods that start with /books and then whatever is after /books permit everyone to access those get endpoints. So it's interesting to notice that you can permit all methods if you don't specify method here, or you can only permit get methods in this fashion. Now for all endpoints where method is get and URL starts with admin, you need to have admin role. For all endpoints where method is get and URL starts with user, you need to have a role user. And for everything else that is not this, so for everything else you need to be authenticated, which means you need to send me the token through the header, and you don't need to send me a role, but you need to send me a token, valid token. You can send the token with the user role, without any roles, with admin role, but you need to send me a token. Okay, we said that we will save our users into our Postgres database, right? So we will have some tables. Having that in mind, we need to create mapping using JPA, our ORM mapper. So this will be a registered user in the database. We will save registered user ID, full name, email, password, and list of authorities. I will explain this method a little bit later. Now, of course, we have our mapping. Also, we have our Spring Data repository, nothing unusual. So we are finding our registered user by email. If we take a look at the database, click refresh here, we have registered user table where email, full name, password, and ID are saved, and we have this element collection authorities table where we can see that user with ID 1 has admin role, with 1 has user role, and so on and so on. Basically, mappings for our user in the database. Okay, so we need some way to connect our registered user mapping and our registered user repository to the Spring security. So somewhere in the Spring code, Spring would love to fetch data about our registered user from the database. But how can Spring know that it really needs to call this repository and this, and then work with this mapping? Well, for that reason, we have to implement this interface, user details service. This is from Spring Security Core package. So we want to implement that service, and that service has one method. So Spring internals, Spring Security will call this method when they want the data about logged in user. And then we will delegate to our repository, find by email, and then we need to transform our registered user to the Spring format user. So Spring format is using this user details interface. This user details needs to have password, authorities, and username. Now there is one implementation that Spring provided, and that's a user implementation. As you can see, this user implements user details and so on and so on. So we are just adapting our data to the Spring format. So basically we are creating instance of this Spring user class. Object of that class needs username, password, and authority. So we will pass our email, because that will be our username. Email will act as a username, password, and the third thing is authorities. We just need to convert a list of strings which we store in the database to this simple granted authority. Okay, and here we have if authorities is null. This is some shorter way for if-else statements. So if authorities is null, then the result is new array list, empty list. If not, then use stream to map those list of string to this list of simple granted authority that is required as a third parameter to this user constructor. Okay, so here is our user details service that implements user details service from Spring. And now we need to connect that user details service, our user details service, to our security configuration. And as you can see, we are doing that inside this configuration by setting user details service here. Now let's start from the beginning and see what those 3 bins are all about. 4 bins actually. First bin, password encoder. Now, as you will see, we will not store pure password in the database. That is a bad practice. We want to store encoded string. So instead of, let's say that your password is test123, in the database it won't be test123, but it will be test123 encoded. So some, let's say, random string. You will see later. Now, which bin will convert our pure password to which bin will encode our password with some encoding algorithm? Well, that is this. This is the bin, password encoder, bcrypt password encoder. That's why we need this bin. Now about authentication manager and provider. What is the difference between those two things? Well, Spring is a framework that is used by many corporations, and many corporations, they have crazy requirements. For example, for one group of requests, they need one authentication. For another group of requests inside the same project, they need another type of authentication. So how to achieve that? Well, Spring created one facade, one manager, let's say, authentication manager, and based on request type, this manager is delegating to a proper authentication provider. Now we have very simple application. For every single request, we will have the same authentication. That's why we have only one provider. But it's not really crucial to understand the difference, but it's very interesting to see facade pattern in action. You can check facade pattern in my blog. So basically, we are configuring authentication manager. Now, to be honest, I'm not sure why is this not done inside Spring automatically, but for some reason it's not. Then after that, we define our authentication provider. We are setting our user detail service and our password encoder, and then we are returning that provider. Regarding this course configuration, I won't tell you so much because don't want to bother you with this course configuration in the same fashion like CSRF. This is another security concept. You can Google about it, but you need to create this configuration in order for your project to work. Feel free to Google what is this course all about. We won't cover it. Okay, the next thing is we want to configure our filter. This one, right? So we want to say inside some filter, hey, get token from authorization header, extract username, blah, blah, blah. That's done inside this JWT authentication filter. Let me show you for a second how one JWT token looks like. So this is how encoded token looks like, and this is how decoded token looks like. I'm doing this encoding decoding at jwt.io website, and you will notice that if I paste my token, I can see decoded value. I don't need any secret, any public private key, whatever, to do this decoding. That's very important thing to remember. Remember it for now, and we will just talk a little bit further into details a bit later. So you can see decoded value of our token is, first of all, we can see which algorithm is this. Subject, our username is this. The time when our token is issued is this. This is the date representation. When our token will expire is this. And in the token terminology, JWT token terminology, every field is called claim. Important thing, as I said, is that you can do decoding without any secret, but vice versa is not possible. So you cannot take JSON and then encode that JSON to the token without secret. For that, you will need a secret. That means that your token information can be stolen very easily. Every time when you share the token with someone, you're sharing the content of that token. But be aware that that person cannot alter the token and then that altered token to encode and send you malicious encoded altered token. That's not possible because for encoding they need secret, which you are not sending them, right? Okay, let's get back to our filter. So we have three dependencies to our filter. First of all, user details service. We saw this service that it's our service that we created previously to connect our mapping for the user, I mean our table that is storing data about authenticated users and Spring Security. That is that service. I created one util class JWT service that has some methods to manipulate token. I'll show you that later. And we have some exception resolvers from Spring. We will use that exception resolver only to better handle exception if exception happens. So let's see what we have here. First of all, we need to extend once per request filter, which means that this filter will trigger only once per every request. Now, logically, parameters are request, response. We can get things from the request, we can set things to the response, and so on and so on. This filter chain is, you remember when I told you that one filter needs to delegate to the next filter? Well, that's the filter chain. If you want to delegate to the next filter, you call this do filter method and pass request and response. So first of all, we get authorization header. And if we need to make sure that header is present and that header starts with bearer prefix. This is the prefix for all JWT tokens. If header is not present or this is not the prefix, then we just want to delegate to the next filter and we want to exit from our filter immediately. Okay, if header is present and valid, then we want a substring, so we want to skip this prefix, skip first few letters, and then we want to extract username from our token. So this is the token string, we want to extract username. That's done inside this get username util method. I'll show you that later. So what do we do now? First of all, we get authentication from the Spring context. We want to make sure that user is not already authorized. How to check that? Well, we need to get from the Spring security context holder, from the Spring context, we want to get authentication. This static method is used for that. There is no good explanation why this method, why it's static, and so on and so on. Very hard to explain to beginners, but this is where Spring authentication is located. Okay, so only if user is not already authenticated, so if user is not authenticated already, and if email from the token is different from null, only then load user by username from the database. This details service is this one from the before, we showed it. So we try to find our details about registered user in the database, and then this is returning registered user. We need to convert that registered user to user details. This to user details method is doing that. Okay, we have the data from the database about user. We need to see, is token valid? So we need to compare token and what we got from the database. And this is basically comparing our usernames equals and is token expired or not. So if token is valid, then we need to create object of this class username password authentication token and put that token inside this authentication inside the security context holder. So here we tried to retrieve authentication, and here after everything is okay, token is fine, we are setting authentication back to the Spring context. At the end of the method, regardless of what we did here, did we set new authentication or not, we need to delegate to the next filter. That's what this line is all about. And in the case that some exception handled here, make sure to properly handle that exception using this handler exception resolver. So we explained this JWT authentication filter. We can just take a short look at this JWT service. This is a util class. Important thing to notice is that we are reading two things from the application properties file here: secret key and how much the token will last. So let me show you what I set in our application properties file. So I set some key here and I said after this amount of seconds token will expire, and this is 1 day. So token expiration time is 1 day. Here is the link which you can use to generate this secret key, or you can just copy paste mine. But if you go to that link, you can put some string here and some secret here, and then this string will be encoded using this secret key, and you will get some string. Just copy paste that string here. So we have those two things here. Now we have some method, get all claims. So from the string token, extract claims. How is that done? Well, using some class from those JWT dependencies. This is not that important. Like how do you generate the token? Again, here is how you generate the token. As you can see, you can set some claims in this fashion, but also you can set custom claims with this set claims method. So you can put inside the map, I don't know, claim 1, and then the value can be whatever you like. You can put custom claims in this fashion. Few other methods is token valid, blah blah blah. This method is to transform your string secret key to this key object, which is from Java security. So those things are not that important, but I'll need really to show it to you. The last part of the puzzle is to show you where endpoints for logging and registering are exposed, and after that we will try just to see if this really works. So this is a very simple controller that exposes two endpoints. So /auth/register, that is this endpoint, and /auth/login is this endpoint. Through the request body, we have this register user request DDO, which indicates that body should have those 4 fields, and we are just delegating to this authentication service register method, which is only creating a registered user object from this request. So basically it's taking get full name from the request and sets that name to registered user, and the same thing for all 4 fields. Just one thing to make sure to take a note is that when we are getting password, we need to encode that password using password encoder, and only encoded password is written into database, into this registered user. Then we are using Spring Data JPA repository to save that registered user to the database. Regarding this login endpoint, we are first delegating to this authenticate method, which is delegating to authentication manager, and this manager will try to do authentication. How will this manager do authentication? Well, it will delegate, if you remember properly, to user detail service, and then this user detail service will ask this registered user repository to find by email, and so on and so on. So nothing special. This authentication manager will try to do authentication. If it fails, it will throw an exception. If it doesn't fail, then we will be logged in, which means that Spring will put authentication token inside security context holder. We saw that security context holder already previously inside our JWT filter. So basically Spring will do that internally. It will put authentication inside Spring security context. So basically we are sending a username, which is in our case email, and we want to generate token from that username. For that purpose, we are using this generate token from JWT service. And then at the end, we are creating this response by setting the token and setting the field when that token expires. And that's all about this controller. Those classes are just DTO classes, nothing spectacular there. And authentication service, it only has two methods registered. We already saw that. And authenticate, which is delegating to authentication manager. Very simple service. This can be this can be Lombok constructor. So now it's even simpler. Very simple thing. And that's basically it. Let's try our endpoints using Postman. Okay, first of all, let's check the state of our users in the database. So we don't have registered users yet, and this authorities table is also empty, right? First of all, before proceeding to Postman to test our application, I want to fix two bugs that I created. First of all, when we set expiration for the token, we are setting time in milliseconds. And this JWT expiration inside our application properties is in seconds. So we need to multiply those seconds with 1000 to get milliseconds and then add those milliseconds to current time in milliseconds. That's bug number one. And bug number two is we need to expose this /error endpoint to everyone, because Spring will sometimes redirect you to this /error, and you want to make sure that this URL is accessible to everyone, so everyone is able to see errors. Okay, let's go to the Postman. Okay, let's first invoke register endpoint. So we are calling register post method. We are passing register data through the body. I gave myself admin role, so I hit send. It says 200 okay, so I'm properly registered. Now let's try to log in using my credentials, right? Okay, login. I'm passing through the body email and password. Send. And I got some token. Let's copy paste that token. And since I have admin privilege, let's try to invoke this admin/test endpoint. Now to my token, I need to append bearer prefix. So I'm passing through the authorization header bearer space and then my token, my wall token. If I try send, I got 200 okay. If I try to disable this header, so I'm not sending this header now, and I try to call admin/test, I will receive 403 forbidden, which means I don't have enough privileges to see this endpoint. But this is actually a very weird behavior. We expected 401 unauthorized, and we expected 401 because we didn't send any token, so we should fail on authentication. This 403 indicates that we are authenticated but not authorized. But how are we authenticated if we didn't send token? The problem is actually that our Spring wasn't configured properly. So if you add this part of the code, so we want to receive unauthorized when the token is not sent, and if you try to restart your application, you should receive 401 when you're not sending token. Let's give it a try. Okay, if we try send now, everything is fine. Okay, now of course if we send our token, everything will be okay. If we try to send this token, but we try to invoke user endpoint, so the endpoint where we need user privileges, we will receive 403 forbidden. So we don't have user role, remember? We only have admin role. You may ask, yeah, but admin covers user role. Whenever you are admin, you usually have all permissions that user has. And that's logical, but that's not what we said in our application. We will fix that problem later. So we will create this user/test to be accessible to anyone who has either user or admin role. For now, let's try only our third controller. So other controller, if you remember, I created one /other/test and I didn't configure anything to other, which means that that URL should be under this part of the code. So you should be authenticated, but roles are not specified, which means that you should just pass valid token with any role. So let's give it a try. Other, send, OK. So we are able to access this endpoint using admin administrators, using admin role. If we try without the token, we are not authorized and we will receive 401. Okay, now let's fix that thing that we just mentioned. So we want this endpoint to be accessible to user or admin. So instead of has role, there is a method has any role. And then you can pass multiple roles. You can say user, admin, and you can mention many roles, array of roles. So if we try to stop our application and start it again, now you can see that if we try to invoke user/test with admin role, we received 200 OK. So that's how to do, let's say, or in security, either user role or admin role. Okay, now let's talk about the difference between role and authority. In our case, we used roles, as you can see, has role, has any role, and so on and so on. Now, if you are administrator, we said you have a permission to, let's say, create a topic, to leave a comment, maybe to delete a comment, and so on and so on. So one role has multiple permissions. When you are a user, you don't have permission to create a topic, but you have permission to write a comment, but you don't have permission to delete comments of other users, right? So every role has multiple permissions. And here in the Spring Security, role is actually called role and permission is called authority. So every role in Spring Security has multiple authorities. Now a good question is, in the database we have that this user ID has this authority, role admin, but how can Spring distinguish is this a role or authority? Well, every role has prefix role underscore and then name of the role, and authority don't have a prefix. So let's say that for this get method that starts with admin, you need authority admin read. We set up that, and in the database we would need to put here, instead of role admin, we would need to put admin read without prefix. Okay, I changed my database data, so now we have under authorities admin read. Let's try to restart our application to see if it works. So we are trying to call admin/test with the token of the user that has authority admin read. We hit send, it's 200 OK. This indicates that role needs to have a prefix, authority doesn't have a prefix. Okay, let's try to create one bug on purpose so we can see how to debug this Spring Security, right? So I on purpose commented this line, so in our project now CSRF is enabled. And if you try to hit this auth login endpoint, which should be accessible to everyone, if you try send, you're receiving forbidden error. Something is wrong. So you can go to your console and you can try take a look what's going on there. And you will see some filter chain here. This is the list of all filters that Spring Security is invoking in that particular order. So you want to see which one of those filters gave you 403 error. So you can try with some filter, let's say in the middle, like binary search. You go to that filter. You search for either do filter or do filter internal methods. So do filter internal method here, put breakpoint. Then you can go to the next filter, CSRF filter. And you can go do filter internal, awesome, put breakpoint here. Now let's see which filter is working properly and which is not working properly. So we see that we are in the breakpoint. In which filter we are? We are inside header writer filter, which means that all filters before header writer filter are not restricting us, because if some filter before header writer filter is throwing access denied exception, we won't reach this filter. So those three filters are okay. Now let's see what's happening here. Step over F8, seems okay. Okay. So we are calling next filter. We didn't saw any send error method, we didn't saw any exception, something weird. So we just went through a few methods and we see that next filter in the chain is called. Okay, let's resume program. Okay, we are in the CSRF filter. Cool, which means that all filters before this one are okay. Now we are debugging this CSRF, right? Step over, go, okay, go after this one. And now we can see that there is some if here, and delegating to the next filter is here. And we don't have delegating inside if, and on the top of everything we have some access denied handler. So some class that will handle access denied, which means that if we enter this if, we are denying access to the request, right? And actually that's what's happening. We are entering here, and this access denied handler is invoked. It will handle access denied, and this do filter will not be invoked. So we won't delegate to the next filter. If we enter this method, we will see that here inside the response send error method is called with HTTP status forbidden. And we got to this access denied handler from the CSRF filter. So something is wrong with CSRF, right? Okay, and that's what's indicating us that CSRF is problem, and maybe we should disable that CSRF. And if we do that, that's when this CSRF filter won't complain anymore and our application works properly. Okay, that was basically how to debug your Spring Security to see which filter is giving you headache. Now, there is one thing regarding authorization that I don't like here. First of all, our book controller is in one class, and permissions for that book controller are here inside security filter chain config in another class. I would expect that here in the book controller there is some annotation here that is saying something like roles, and then we say here role admin or book admin or something like that. That would make sense. Roles that are related to this endpoint are inside the same class. Also, Another problem is that if you put all roles and everything here and you have, let's say, 100 endpoints, this will become very complex. And also, you can only do roles and permission simple things. So you cannot do some custom complex things here. I'll show you what I mean by custom complex things. Okay, first of all, we need to enable method security using this annotation. So you want to set those three things to the true. This one is true by default, that's why it's gray. You can omit that one, but it won't hurt if it's here. So now when we are able to do method security, that means that here we can delete what we said for admin and user. Let's delete that for a second, and we will go to admin controller and we will say here add secured, this is a Spring annotation, and we will say you need role admin for this. And then we will go to user controller, we will say here secured, you need role user. So if you wanna check for role for this method, you need role suffix. If you want authority, then you don't need prefix. So let's say that you, for this method, you want from the token to achieve user read authority. This is how it would be, without any role or authority prefix. But we want to play with roles for now. In the database, I edited the data, so now our user has role administrator. Let's try to start our application to see what will happen. Don't forget that we deleted rules from here, so we only have those rules that are here. And if we try to hit our /admin/test endpoint using the token of the user that has role admin, we will receive 200 OK. If we try user/test, we will receive forbidden because we don't have user role. Let's go to another thing. So I added this annotation which is saying only if email parameter, this one, is equals to the username from the Spring context, only in that case you are allowed to call this method. When is this useful? Well, you can just think for a second of some let's say social network like Facebook. You want to see a list of your friends. So if you are logged in, you are able to see your own friends. But maybe I'm not authorized to see your friends. So you have permission to access, let's say that this is get friends. You have permission for this get friends, but only if you're passing parameter email, the same one that is inside Spring Security. So if you're trying to fetch your friends of the user that is logged in. Let's try to see if this works. Okay, now we need to pass request param email through the URL. So I did that, email equal, and then I passed the email of this user with this token. If I try send, 200 OK. If I try to alter this a little bit and I try send, then it's forbidden. So based on what's inside the request param, I have different response. The question is why here we have authentication.principal.username. Now you remember that we had that here when we were doing authentication, we set some authentication into the context, right? We set this token. So that is actually authentication. That authentication has field which is called principal, right? And principal is the first parameter in the constructor. First parameter in the constructor was user details. So principal is user details, and user details First, you remember we used this user class. First field of the user is username. So that's why we have, this is actually a field name. This is the field from the context, this is the field inside authentication, and this is the field inside principal. What you can also do using this pre-authorized annotation is to delegate to some Spring Bean. So I'm saying here, delegate the bean with this name, sec service, security service, and call security check method and pass arguments to that method. Arguments for that method are, first is parameter of this method, so you need to pass email, that is this email, and the second one is from the Spring security context, take username, and pass those two things to this security check method. Here I created simplest Spring Bean service, and it has one method, security check, email and username. And if I try to hit this method now, send, before coming to the controller, this security service bean will be invoked, this security check method. And here you can do custom logic. You can delegate to repository, to another service, to whatever you like, external service. So this is the custom thing. You can check the eyes color of your users or whatever you like. You can do whatever custom logic you like. At the end, you just want to return either true or false. Is this this request authorized or it's not authorized? And that's basically how you can really customize your authorization. And that would be really everything regarding authentication and authorization and JWT tokens that you need to know as a beginner. That's enough for the security. See you in the next video.